Welcome, everyone, to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and it's been a tradition the last couple of years to feature the history of a presidential election on election night on this channel. The Patreon members voted for the presidential election of 1856 to be featured, pitting James Buchanan versus John C. Fremont. The year 1856 was a monumentous and violent year in American history. Bleeding Kansas brought the slavery question to new heights of violence, with a civil war raging in the proposed state and violence breaking out in the Senate chambers over the issue of slavery. The president was Franklin Pierce, a Democrat from New Hampshire. His pro-slavery policies as president had turned many Northern Democrats against him, and it didn't help that the American political landscape was getting uplifted at the same time. Since the early 1850s, the Whig Party had rose up to contest the presidency of Andrew Jackson and was dying out. Many of its members began joining the Democratic Party, the Know-Nothings, or the New Republican Party. So Pierce would have a battle for his own party's nomination. Three other men were in the running for the coveted presidential nomination. James Buchanan was a prominent politician, having been the minister to both the United Kingdom and Russia, as well as being a member of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Additionally, President James K. Polk named him Secretary of State. He was from Pennsylvania, but he had Southern policy leanings, which made him an attractive candidate. Stephen Douglas was another politically powerful candidate. He was a political powerhouse because of his role in creating the concept of popular sovereignty, the doctrine that a state could choose whether they wanted to be free or slave. However, he had gained great criticism for that proposal because it nullified the Missouri Compromise, which had divided the country along the 3630 parallel, with the northern half being free while the southern half was slave. Lewis Cass, the man who ran in the presidential election of 1848, was also discussed for nomination. He had been both the governor of Michigan and a senator from Michigan, as well as the Secretary of War under Andrew Jackson. His long time in politics made him a common name to Americans, which would carry weight in the election if he became the candidate for the Democratic Party. The Democratic National Convention was held in Cincinnati in June 1856. The three candidates of Pierce, Buchanan, and Douglas gained the most votes in the first few ballots, putting Cass out of the run-in, but with every ballot, Pierce began to lose votes and Douglas began to gain votes. Then it came down to Douglas and Buchanan. But after multiple ballots, Buchanan's group wasn't given in, and he still had more ballots than Douglas. Douglas didn't want to further divide the party, believing if he pressed the matter it might endanger the Democratic Party as a whole, so Buchanan was named the Democratic nominee. The Republican Party was a new party in 1856. It emerged as a response to the expansion of slavery, making a firm stand in its platform that they would oppose slavery's expansion to the territories. They wanted to limit where slavery could go, but didn't push the issue about getting rid of slavery where it currently existed. Some Republicans did want to abolish slavery outright, but they avoided that stance to be more electable. This would be the party's first presidential election. Their convention was held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, also in June of 1856. They adopted a platform that opposed the expansion of slavery, opposed polygamy in the Mormon settlements, and carried over their Whig ancestry of supporting federal funds for building a transcontinental railroad. 5 men were in the running for the presidential nomination: John C. Fremont, John McLean, William Seward, Salmon Chase, and Charles Sumner. The latter 3 withdrew their names from consideration. Sumner because he had suffered a horrendous beating at the hands of Preston Brooks and was not fit to run. John McLean had held a host of political positions. Having been born in 1785, he had been Postmaster General, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, a member of the House of Representatives, and Commissioner of the General Land Office. His long opposition to slavery made him an attractive candidate for the Republican Party. John C. Fremont was a famous explorer of the American West. He became an excellent surveyor, and through his father-in-law, Thomas Hart Benton, the U.S. Senator from Missouri, he gained many government jobs to explore all the way to Oregon. During the Mexican-American War, he helped to secure California for the United States, and when it became a state, he became one of its senators. Although he was born in the South and raised in a slaveholding household, he was against the expansion of slavery into the territories and an advocate for Free Soil, Kansas. At the Republican convention, Fremont was chosen as the presidential nominee. The campaign slogan would be "Free Soil, Free Men, and Fremont." Out of the ashes of the Whig Party also came the Know-Nothings, also known as the American Party. The Republican Party saw the biggest threat to the United States being the institution of slavery, but the American Party saw the biggest threat to the United States as immigration and the Catholic Church. It gained a strong foothold in the 1850s, particularly in the Northeast, where many of the immigrants were coming through. The American Party held their convention in February of 1856. There they chose the former President Millard Fillmore as their candidate. The problem was, Fillmore was not a know-nothing. He was actually out of the country when the nomination took place. Nevertheless, his campaign on the American Party ticket downplayed the anti-immigration stance of the party and rallied around the idea of national unity. The campaign emphasized that Buchanan and Fremont would further divide the country with their extreme views, but Fillmore would bring the country closer together. Similar to what would occur 4 years later, the Democratic Party warned that if the Republicans were elected, then civil war would break out across the country. Republicans warned that the expansion of slavery would diminish white men's chances of prospering in the newly formed western states, that the institution of slavery needed to be halted and contained. As said earlier, the American Party emphasized national unity. During the campaign, it was falsely alleged that Fremont was a Catholic, playing on the nativist fears present in the country. The American Party had hoped to gain some of their former Whig allies who had defected to the Republican Party to support Fillmore. The Democrats saw this as a way to split the Republican and American Party voters, and the Republicans feared to refute the false allegation because it may scare off some of their Catholic supporters if they were too harshly opposed to the idea. The country was heavily divided and acted almost as two countries, with the free states seeing a legitimate three-way race, while the slave states had only two contenders to the presidency, Buchanan and Fillmore. In the slave states, Buchanan would receive 56.1% of the vote, while Fillmore received 43.8% of the vote, with less than 0.1% voting for Fremont. In the free states, Fremont came away with 45.2%, Buchanan 41.5%, and Fillmore 13.3%. Ultimately, Buchanan won 174 electoral votes, winning all of the slaveholding states except for Maryland, which went to Fillmore. Fremont captured all of the New England states, New York, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa, for a total of 114 electoral votes. James Buchanan came out the winner, but the Republican Party didn't see it as a total loss. It was the first time that they had put up a candidate for the presidency. It wasn't a shock that they lost. It was a shock they did so well. This put the Republican Party on the trajectory to run another Republican candidate for the presidency in 1860, and of course, that man was Abraham Lincoln. When we hear about pivotal elections in American history, we don't need to forget the election of 1856. It gave the Republican Party a morale boost to pursue more seats in government and later the presidency.